All right. Welcome back. We took Monday off. I took Monday off. And today is a pelvic reset practice. And I will start by saying that there are several ways that I have been taught to reset my pelvis. This is, for all practical purposes, the quick and dirty version that we're going to do today. And I find it useful if you do not know, if you have an imbalance, or obviously if you don't know you have an imbalance, you wouldn't know what that imbalance is. So I'm going to have you start lying down. So I'm going to take the position that I want you to take just for a moment. I'm going to have you come down because we're going to find some bony landmarks because we want to know exactly what the pelvis is. So we're going to get started right away. Come on down and let your back rest. Let's keep our legs straight. Actually, take your legs out. Maybe jelly roll your legs. Let your body fall into the ground. And maybe place your hands on the center of your body, somewhere, anywhere in your torso. And feel your body breathing you. Let's just start with that on this lovely Wednesday morning, feeling your body breathing you. And as you're feeling your body breathing you, notice the back side of the body, everything that is touching the ground, that's feeling the support of the ground. And then we're going to slide our hands, if they're on your belly or up somewhere, and you're going to slide them down right to where you can feel the bony ridge of your hips. So we're going to come right to the bony ridge of the hips, and I just want you to run your fingers along that bony ridge of your hips. That's what we call the iliac crest. And just familiarize yourself with that because this is part of our pelvis. So the iliac crest, or sometimes we just say the ilium, has a left and a right. And as you're feeling those bony landmarks, you might even be able to tell that there is a difference. One might be higher, meaning hiked higher towards the armpit than the other, or the other lower, more towards the feet. You might even sense that one is higher towards the ceiling than the other, but that's typically easier to feel in the back. So we'll get there for a moment. But I just want you to familiarize yourself. And if you run your fingers all the way out to the edges of the iliac crest, that's a very important point. There you'll feel that really big bony landmark. That's called we call it your ASIS point, Anterior-posterior iliac spine. So it's just a landmark point that we just want to find, and that's right on the outer edges of the hips. So familiarizing yourself with that bone, because really the pelvis is very simple. When we're doing a reset, we're really working with the bones. And the bones as a whole are meant to move together. The pelvic girdle moves together. However, there is some play from left to right. Not a lot, but there absolutely is, and we want that play. So now I'm going to have you go into the back side, and if you want to slide your hands underneath you, you can, but before you do that, just notice if the way your body is resting on the ground, does it feel like there's more weight in, say, one butt cheek or one hip than the other? Just noticing the way that your body is resting on the ground. Or is there more pulling in one side of the back than the other? We're just kind of checking it out. And then if you've done that and you may not feel a difference, and that's okay, we're still just familiarizing us these places of the pelvis, then go ahead and run your hands underneath there. And what we find back there is so the ilium will wrap around, and it's connected by our beautiful, lovely sacrum. I call it the sacred sacrum, which is a downward facing triangular bone. And actually when we're born as infants, because we're in a fetal curl, they are separate vertebrae, and then they fuse. As we get older, they fuse, and they're what provides more stability in the pelvis and also allows us to come out of that fetal curl, right? It's part of that. So just feeling that area, thinking of your sacrum right in the middle. It's kind of the glue that holds the two hip bones together. and just sensing that area. And then we'll come back around to the front, and one of the other landmarks I like to be familiar with when we're working with resetting the pelvis is the pubic bone. And if you slide your hands all the way down below your navel center, so just below the navel, you'll be able to actually feel your pubic bone. And that would be the front bony landmark, where the sacrum is the back of the bony landmark. And this is not, again, this is never an anatomy test when I start with these things. It's for you to familiarize your internal felt sense with these bony landmarks, right? That's all this is. Don't worry about remembering names. Remember felt sense. What does it feel like to be there? What does it feel like to gently palpate your pubic bone? And then the last point, if you want to find it, that I like to point out is, so this would be typically when we're standing or sitting, the bottom of the pelvic bowl, because it is shaped like a bowl. So we had the front side was the iliac crest, the back side was where we went into the sacrum, and then we also felt the pubis down below, but even below that, at the bottom is what we call our sits bones, or the ischium. So there's the ilium and the ischium. The ilium was the upper part, ischium the bottom of the bowl. And you might even take your fingers down there and just you'll feel those big bones on either side of your inner thighs and your inner groin area. Call them the ischial tuberosities. Sits bone is much easier to say. But just feel around. So familiarize yourself with that's the bottom of the pelvic bowl, right? So now we'll get ready to do our reset. And again, I'm encouraging you to explore this with an open mind. If you do know that you have a tendency to have any sort of imbalance in the pelvis, then it is one of three. So you're just resting for a moment. If you're more comfortable bending your legs, go ahead and do that. Bend your legs, place your feet back on the floor. So the way we familiarize how we can have imbalance in the pelvis is through movement. So now with the knees bent and feet on the floor, one of the first ways we can have imbalance is what I would say front to back, or what's called anterior-posterior. So if we do our pelvic tilting, you can inhale and very gently, because I want you to feel it from the back and the front, think of now that pubic bone in the front and the sacrum in the back and the tailbone at the bottom. As you breathe in, gently lift the sacrum and press the tailbone down, or you're going to roll into the bottom point of the sacrum, and you'll feel your pubic bone lift up and go slightly forward, and then come back down and just relax. So you're tilting your pelvis forward. And we need to have this ability to tilt our pelvis in a forward motion, but I want you to feel it from these bony landmarks. So really focusing on the bones, because the pelvis is bones. It's obviously moved from the muscles, but a pelvic reset is working with the bones. So focusing on the you can feel you can even touch the top of that iliac crest, or that ASIS point, and notice how those points are lifting up towards your ceiling and then going forward. Keeping the legs relaxed and exhaling. It's best to do the tilting forward on an inhale. And you might notice how as your pelvis tilts forward, what's happening to your lumbar spine is it's shortening, it's contracting. So having said that, what we recognize is if we stand all the time, so hard to get me in the picture today, with a forward tilting pelvis, what that's going to do is cause a lot of chronic tension in the lumbar spine, among other things. So take that next tilt forward, press the tailbone down slightly, lift the lumbar spine, and hold it for a few breaths. And notice if you don't feel a little bit of pinching or tightness in that lumbar spine. So that's not a position we want to hold all the time, and that can happen. Go ahead and release that. The other way we sometimes see the pelvis is stuck in a posterior tilt. So now, as you're exhaling, you're going to gently press the sacrum down. Think of starting from the bottom of the sacrum and then coming up to the top and even into the space above the lumbar spine, so those 5 vertebrae, and into the ribs. And you'll notice how your tailbone might slightly lift, but try not to lift your tailbone. So there's this over-exaggeration of lifting the tailbone up. Keep the low back long. Just feel a little bit of lengthening, like you're lengthening your sacrum and your low back. And you can do that on the exhale, and then release. And now once again, feel that from the sacrum, because that's where you can feel the sacrum the best, right? Because it's on the floor. And notice this posterior tilt of the entire pelvis. So now, if you feel the iliac crest, it's tilting towards your arms or towards your head and down towards the floor. And it seems like a simple thing, but visualize it in your mind's eye as your bones moving. And we're moving the whole structure of the pelvis together. You might sense your pubic bone. It lifts upward and comes towards your heart. And that tailbone also slightly lifts off the ground, but again, not exaggerating it. It's kind of lengthening forward. And just feeling the way you're rolling through the sacrum from one end to the other. So again, some people can get stuck. I'm going to cut my head off so you can see. Some people get stuck, and I should say not just stuck, but the way we sit tends to keep us in this posterior tilt of the pelvis. So this can cause a lot of dysfunction as well. You can see if I'm in a posterior tilt of my pelvis, generally my shoulders are going to be forward and my head that's a whole other story. But it's about the pelvis is the part of your body that connects your spine to your legs, right? So it's basically setting the shape for your spine and also setting the comfort and mobility for your legs. So we also don't want to be in that posterior tilt. And now if you want to go back and forth between the anterior posterior a few times, go ahead and do that. Just see how that feels. So the other thing I want you to experience, so that was the lateral tilt, or I'm sorry, that was the front to back. Now we're going to do a lateral tilt of the pelvis. And again, so we're doing this kind of an assessment for yourself to understand that we need this ability to move it, but we also don't want it to be stuck at either end, right? We don't want to be stuck in the anterior position. We don't want to be stuck in the posterior position. So the same is going to go with the lateral tilt, or what I refer to often as a hip hike. Anytime you need to, by the way, if you need to bring your legs in or roll around a little bit and release that sacred sacrum, go ahead and do that. So then the feet will come back down, and I'm going to have you lengthen your legs out. And I've got my dog there in the way. Sorry, Tanner. So lengthen your legs out, just jelly roll them a little bit, let them relax. So lateral tilt would mean one hip is up towards the armpit, or you can think of your waist being shorter on one side than the other. So let's make that happen. Place your hand on that ASIS point or somewhere along the front of the hip there. And I like to do it on a breath out. You can do it whenever you want, though. Imagine if you were a marionette and they had a string on that hip, and you're going to pull that string towards your hip, towards your armpit, and then let it go. And do either side. You're going to do both sides. So whichever side you want to do. Imagine pulling. So we're contracting one side of the waist muscles, and then we're letting it go. And whichever side is shortening, you'll notice that the other side is lengthening. So we're creating a tilt of the pelvis from up and down, right? So it's like when we walk, and I'm on my knees, so it's a little odd, but when we walk, one leg has to lift up to get that foot forward, right? And the other hip is below it. So just working on that one leg first and see how that feels. And this is another way to notice, do you have a lot of tightness? Like for instance, you might have good coordination of the muscles in that left, or whichever side you're shortening, sorry. But is there a lot of tension or tightness in the other side that needs to lengthen? And here's something else you can do to experience this tilting, or this hip hike as I call it, is now do it the other way. Let whichever hip was shortening, or the side body was shortening, push through the opposite leg and lengthen through that side, and then let it go and see how that feels. So remember, we can create force in different ways. We might shorten the muscles through one side, but we can also lengthen the muscles through the other side, and that's automatically going to shorten. So play with that for a moment. Just see how it feels. So you're still shortening the same side and lengthening the opposite, but now the action of the shortening and lengthening is coming from the leg that's the side body that's getting longer. This is a tough one to do in a video. I wish I could see you well. And just exploring. So feel it. You're going to feel the muscles need to move the pelvis. We understand that, right? These are bones. But feel the movement of the bones by placing your hands there, and notice even the sacrum, how the sacrum has to tilt a little bit. The sacrum, there's lots of arguments. It has very little maneuverability, but trust me when I tell you it does have maneuverability in the what we call the SI joint. So that joint right between the pelvic bones that you feel and where it attaches to your sacrum. And just see how that tilting is feeling. Now let go again, relax, and we'll work the opposite way. So whichever hip you weren't hiking up, so for me it's my right one, let's start by actively shortening, or this is a true contraction. You're going to imagine that marionette puppet and you're pulling that hip up towards your armpit. It's like, or if somebody grabs, I imagine somebody grabbing my belt loop and pulling my belt loop up. So I'm not lifting my hip off or lifting my butt cheek off the floor. I'm sliding it up towards my armpit. And again, here's an opportunity to see, do you have the ability to engage the muscles to lift this side of the hip, but also when you're lifting the one side and shortening, you're going to feel the lengthening through the other side. Is there a lot of restraint in that other side? And can you feel a difference between the two? So it's just a little assessment for yourself. And you're lifting up and releasing. And then you can also make this movement the other way, meaning whichever side was lengthening, purposely press that hip towards your foot. And you'll notice how the same side that was shortening will still be shortening. And let it go. And does it just slide back? So one way you can know that you have this lateral tilt or hip hike all the time is it will often show in a leg length discrepancy. What we think is one leg being shorter than the other typically is not the bones in the legs. The problem is in a contraction of the hip muscles and the psoas and one side. So that will keep one hip being held up all the time. We'll actually have a shortening through one side, and thus it shows in the leg length. So the good thing to know about that is if you do have that, is that it can be fixed through these practices just by learning to release the muscles in that side. So we've done both of the sides of the lateral, and hope you found a little bit out there with the hip hikes. And then the last one we do in what I call the planes of the pelvis is there's also a lateral rotation. So let's see if I can show this one on my knee. So when we take a step or when we're moving at all, one hip not only has to lift, but it has to come forward, right? So that is a rotation, lateral rotation of the pelvis. I'm going to walk on my knees. And you see it. So this is that movement, as a lateral rotation, right? So now I'm going to have you come back to, remember to do whatever you need to in between, back 2 feet on the floor, reacquaint yourself with the bones of the pelvis, because remember, we're working through the pelvis today. And now what we want to do is, let's all start together on the same hip. Let's start on the left hip, is lift the left hip slightly off the ground. So if you're touching that bone, think raise it towards the sky. It doesn't have to go too far. And then let it come back down. And create that force, that lifting ability by, you might have to first press into the left foot a little bit and lift it. But try to keep the leg muscles as relaxed as possible and see if you can gain awareness of the muscles in and around the hip itself, the pelvis, right? So the muscles attached to the pelvic bones, and let it come back down. The other way to feel it is When you come down, your weight will be more or less equal through the back side, through your waistband, and you'll roll through your sacrum, feel the weight transfer in through the sacrum, and then into the right hip as the left hip lifts. And how does that feel? To be lifting just one hip up like that. And we can create, because freedom is being able to create the same movement and different combinations of muscular movement, muscular engagement. So now let's try to do the same thing by pushing into the right hip. So see if you push the back of the right hip and the outer side of the right hip into the ground. Does that left hip just slightly, so we don't need to go all the way over. My legs aren't moving. We're just feeling the pelvis itself, the bones rotate. Left hip lifts up, and then it drops back down. And always coming back to that back down, that state of grace, where you're relaxed and you feel more evenness. And this one gets really interesting for the sacrum. So let's switch sides so we can do the other side. Relax at your center. Now feel your right hip. You can even place your hand on the front of your right hip. And start by lifting the right hip up. And if you need to initially press your foot into the ground and use your leg muscles, you can do that. But then see if you can kind of keep the leg muscles a little more relaxed and feel the muscles in and around like the outer hip and the buttocks to lift that right hip up. And then let it slowly drop down with gravity. So working that right hip by lifting the right hip, or feel yourself, feel the bones of the pelvis. As they roll through, you'll come into equal weight on both sides of the pelvis. As the right hip starts to lift, the weight will go through the sacrum and then over into the left hip. And then you come back through the sacrum and we land on both sides of the back of the pelvis again. Yeah, just take your time. And then see, with the whole, again, the function of these movements is to find the most comfortable way to do it. So now try to lift, get the right hip elevated by pressing the left hip down. And how does that feel? And oftentimes we'll have one side that's stronger. So if we have a permanent lateral rotation of the pelvis, and permanent is kind of a generic term because it can come and go, then often what we feel is we'll have pain in the SI joint. The sacroiliac joint is the place we feel pain. That is my case, by the way. But we can also have a combination of these things. You can have a little bit of a rotation and a hike, and I've seen that many times. But right now you're just exploring, lifting up and dropping back down. But oftentimes pain in the SI joint is indicative of this rotational imbalance in the pelvis. Okay, so now pause for a moment, and you are going to need your block and your strap. That is for our pelvic reset. And if you don't have a block, I mentioned too, you can also use like a bigger ball. You want a ball though that'll keep your knees about as wide as your hips. Same thing with the block, so I'm not going to put the block on the thinnest setting. In fact, typically it's the wider your knees are, the more comfortable it's going to be if this is new for you. So you could go to the widest setting. You just don't want to be on the narrowest setting. So let's we're going to do the strap first. I apologize. Showed you the block, so I know you have it ready. So we're going to take the strap, and it's going to go around the thighs just above the knees. So we're upside down, right? So I don't want it all the way midway to the thighs. I also don't want it on the knee joints, but somewhere you can feel the belly of the hamstrings, but towards the bottom there. And then you're going to tighten the strap to where the feet are about as wide as the hips, just like in constructive rest pose. And if this causes discomfort, you can take it wider, but let's try with the feet just as wide as the hips. And you're going to tighten that strap up. I'm going to turn towards you so you can see. So you're going to tighten the strap up. And this is a very simple one. All we're going to do is as you take a breath in, I want you to push your outer thighs into that strap. Maybe take a few breaths there. Notice the muscles that are coordinating this movement, but also feel the bones, particularly in the back of the pelvis, around the sacrum. You might feel something in the front, around the pubis, but mostly the back. And then on exhalation, just let that go. So that's all we're doing, is we're pushing out into the strap as we breathe in. Take a few breaths there. Keep the leg muscles as relaxed as possible. I mean, obviously you have to activate them to push into it, but see if you can feel stuff around those pelvic bones. Take a few breaths there and release. And continue with a few more of these, feeling yourself not just from the bones, not just from the muscles, because so much of somatics we are focusing on the muscles. But when we work with the pelvis, feel the bones. Can you feel any movement in the bones? So when we do this, we're actually, what's happening when we press our legs out is the pelvic bones in the back are just slightly compressing or pushing into the sacrum in the back. They're actually, so that SI joint is being slightly compressed, just a little bit. And you may or may not feel that. So you're pushing out and releasing. And so what this is also helping us to do from the muscular standpoint is to wake up these muscles in our outer hips and legs, what we'd call the abductors a little bit. Now relax again, just for a moment. Pause, make sure your strap is where you need it, and feet on the ground in that constructive rest pose. Now you're going to actively push into the strap, and you're going to keep that action of pushing into the strap on both sides. And you might even notice when you're doing this that one side is stronger or weaker. And we're going to very slowly and gently rock the legs from side to side. I'm not going to go all the way down. This is not a windshield wiper. I will still keep a good part of my feet, so I'll feel myself rolling into the pinky toe side of the right foot and the big toe side of the left foot just part way, and then come back. I'm still keeping that pressure on the strap, and then slightly the other way. If this does cause too much discomfort, you can widen the strap and do it with a little bit wider strap. That's generally more comfortable. If you feel like it's going well, then you can play with taking the strap a little bit tighter and taking your legs closer together. So that's all we're doing. So now, in addition to that action of pressing into the strap, you're getting that rotation of the pelvis. And just very slowly and mindfully. When you come back to center, you can relax, let that pressure off anytime you want. Release all the muscles in and around the pelvis. So then pushing in again. Explore going to one side. So how does that feel to have, as you go to the left side, the right hip slightly lifts, and it'll rotate, and then also the left waist will shorten and the right waist will lengthen. So you might feel that little bit of arch in the right waist. Come back to center and relax. Going really slow. And then sometimes I let up a little bit on the pressure. I'm still putting pressure on it, but not to that degree. And I gently go back and forth with a little bit more speed. So you can try that too and just see how that feels. Start to feel a little fatigue perhaps in those muscles, waking them up this morning. And are you feeling, so what sometimes happens is you'll feel the fatigue only in one side of the hips, right? That's a good clue that side, either it can be one of two things. It can be that it was working more than the other one, but sometimes it's that it hasn't been doing its job and you just woke those muscles up. All right. And then pause to the center. Go ahead and take that strap off. And before we do the next one, just take your legs out long. Relax for a moment. You can shake them out if you'd like. Jelly roll them. Basketball your knees. Dribble them a little bit. And just feel yourself once again. Notice any changes in the way that your back body, particularly around the back of your hips, your sacrum is resting on the ground. So that was the first half of the reset. And just noticing any changes. So the first part of the video was just kind of giving you an idea of where the pelvis moves and where it might get stuck, where we want it to be able to move fluidly and where it might get stuck. And now we're doing the actual reset. Now the second part, you're going to need that block or the ball. Again, wider is generally more comfortable. And it's going to go in between the thighs. And just again, watch that you're not on the knee joints. Generally, just above the inner knee joints is more comfortable, but everybody's individual in the way they like it. With this one, I'm going to start at the medium in the block so that, again, I'm in a constructive rest position. The center of the hips, the knees, and the ankles are in a straight line. But again, you could use a ball. I do find the block works better if you have both. But try them both. You know, everything's an exploration, right? So block is going in there. You're relaxed, upper shoulders, jaws. And I didn't mention that in the last one, but watch that. When you go to activate your pelvic muscles, does like your throat tighten or your shoulders, right? Can you keep your upper body relaxed? And now you're lying down, but as you exhale, you're going to squeeze the block with the thighs. And then hold it for a few breaths and release. So this one is going to activate those adductor muscles in the inner thighs. And I'm having you do it on an exhalation because some of the other muscles that are involved in the function of the pelvis are your pelvic floor muscles, which are all the way down by the sits bones. See if you feel anything on that exhale. Those lower abdominal muscles just above your pubis. So think of the bones. And remember the muscles attached to the bones, right? With all of those lovely tendons. And you're just squeezing the block and holding for a few breaths. Check to see you're not creating tension anywhere else in the body. And releasing. And do you release when you let go? If you want to, you can explore taking the block a little bit wider. So wider is going to create more of a sensation around the SI joint. Versus narrower. You can also go narrower. So now what's happening is when you're squeezing into the block, what you're actually doing is you're creating just a little bit of force in that backside in the pelvis, drawing the pelvic bones away from the sacrum. So you're making a tiny bit of space in that SI joint itself. So where taking the legs apart was putting compression on the SI joint, the bones coming towards one another. Now we're actually putting a slight bit of what we call tension on the SI joint. We're pulling those bones just a little bit away from one another. And you're just pushing in and releasing. And again, you can play with different, if you've got the block, if you only have the ball, then that's what you go with, unless you have different sizes of balls. You're just squeezing and releasing. And see if you're feeling the muscles around the pelvis, not just the inner thighs. So around the pelvis, again, includes the pelvic floor muscles, the lower, what we call the transverse abdominis, that corset of muscles that wraps horizontally around your belly. And then relax again. And now we're going to take this one into movement. So if you need to take it out for a second, you can. I'm going to go to my midway position. So constructive rest, ankles, knees, and hips lined up. I'm going to put those compressive forces on the block, just enough, and keep it there, and very gently take my legs to one side. So just slightly tipping on to, if I go to the right, the pinky toe side of the right foot, big toe side of the left. Again, I'm not letting my foot lift up. The feet are staying grounded, just rolling onto the edges of the feet. And then coming back. You can choose to release there, or you can still squeeze and go to the opposite side. And coming back. And this one's also interesting because we are working with those inner groin muscles, which I just had a comment about somebody with their Baddha Konasana that their knees are so high. A lot of times what I find with the groin muscles, so they're a lot like hamstrings. We think they're tight. Well, they're tight, but they're also weak, right? They're just not moving. So this is giving you the opportunity to squeeze and activate them, but also come back and release them. Can you feel the muscles when they relax? Or feel the difference in the shape of the bones around the pelvis. Can you feel when you're squeezing, there's like, for me, it feels like a spreading across my low back where the sacrum is. And then I let go of that and it just lands on the ground and there's a sense of ease in my back. But you're just rocking from side to side, exploring. If you do have the block and you want to take it to a different width, please, by all means, do that. When you change the width of the block, though, also change the width of your feet. So I'm really doing these tiny, tiny motions. Really super slow. And then come back to the center. And take that block out. Go ahead and take your legs out long. Relax the legs. You can jelly roll them, shake them out again. And maybe place your hands somewhere on those bony landmarks to the front. You could even go to the bottom of your bowl, to the back side, or notice the back side, you've got the floor there to give you some feedback. You've got the ground there. And just notice what the pelvis feels like. Waking up those muscles. And then just to find more of that freedom of movement, we're going to briefly go through the same movements we did in the very beginning as the assessment. So, and I find this is really helpful for me. What I'll typically do is I do the realignment first, and then I do these movements. But with you, I wanted to do the assessment so you understood the way the pelvis moves. So now feet come back to the floor, and you're just going to do your pelvic tilting. You can inhale and gently roll from the top. Feel how your sacrum is, the whole sacrum might be in contact with the ground, and tilt onto the bottom of the sacrum and towards the tailbone. And exhale, gently go the other way. You'll feel your sacrum press into the ground and the low back and the tailbone lift. And one of the ways I know for myself that the reset was successful is as you're doing this pelvic tilting, if you can remember what it felt like the first time, where was the muscular energy or the force coming from? When I typically do it in the morning, I feel my legs really wanting to overpower this pelvic tilting. Now my legs are relaxed and I can feel much more of the muscles around the pelvis themselves rocking. And it's a movement now again, the whole pelvis is moving together, right? Very simple. And you can check and see if your head is moving. If it is, the chin comes towards the chest as you go under your tailbone. So as we increase the curve in the low back, we flatten the curve in the neck. And then the opposite, as we increase the curve in the neck, the low back flattens, tail to tongue. And that you can see how important the pelvis is as far as the structure of the spine. Just by rocking our pelvis, the head wants to play along in the adventure. I'll do one or two more. And then take your legs long, let them relax. We'll do what I call the hip hike. So we'll do left side first. I have that facing you. Let's start by, you can think of exhaling and shortening the waist. If you're a marionette and they're pulling that hip up, your left hip up towards your armpit, and then releasing. See how that feels. So you're getting a little bit more sense of the pelvic bones and the muscles. And then you can also make the same movement the other way. Instead of thinking of drawing the left hip up towards the armpit and shortening the waist, think of lengthening the right waist. Push that right hip forward along with your foot, and then let go. And ultimately, for comfort and for the most ease in your body, it's probably going to be a combination of both of those movements. So play with that too. What happens if you slightly lift your left hip and press through your right hip? Where is the most ease and movement in creating this lateral tilt? And do a couple more on that side. And then we'll do the opposite side. So legs are still long. Relax for a moment. Feel your right hip. You can imagine that straying, or hold your belt buckle. And then drawing your right hip towards your armpit or shortening that waist. And you'll see how important the waist muscles become too in moving the pelvis. And then release. Feel how So now we're doing one hip at a time, right? So this shows you that they do have independent movement, the left and the right side, and we want this independent movement. And you can also make this independent movement by taking your left leg and very gently pressing the left hip towards your foot or away from your armpit. And notice how your right hip will automatically lift up and shorten. That right side body shortens. And just finding a way to do this movement the most comfortably that you possibly can. So perhaps a combination of pushing the left hip away from your side body while drawing the right hip towards your side body. This one I tend to just let my head roll from side to side. It likes to do that. And the other thing you can do is now you can go both sides. Like you imagine walking, right? One side and let go. Come back to that space of grace. And then the other side and let go. Just like you're walking. Because when you're walking, we have to lift the foot off the ground. In order to lift, the foot doesn't lift itself. I mean, we have the ability to bend the knee to get the foot off the ground, but we want the hip to lift. We want the hip to help lift the foot off the ground, right? And just feel that. You can do one side and the other, just like you're walking in place. If for any reason this is causing pain in the low back, we can also do the same movement with the knees bent, or even if it's not causing pain and you want to try it here, you can do it with your feet bent, or knees bent and feet on the floor. Just a different feeling this back and forth of the pelvis. And then the last one, we would come back to knees bent, and we're going to do the rotation. So we'll start with the right hip. I've got the right hip facing you. So we lift the right hip up, or feel yourself rolling through the center of the back, through the sacrum, and then into the left hip. And coming back down and landing and doing a few with that right hip first. Option to use the most force by thinking of lifting away from the ground, away from gravity with the right hip, or pressing in with the left hip, pushing into gravity, right? Just the right amount of force, or any combination of those two together. And this would be, as we're walking, not only so the hip that lifts up towards the armpit, that side waist has to shorten, it also comes forward to take that step forward. The pelvis should rotate with the leg as it comes forward. And do a few more with just that right side. Feel your bones. Think of the bony landmarks that we found in the beginning. Then we'll go the opposite way. So feel your left hip. Keep your feet and your legs soft. And that's one of the things, again, I watch for is that, am I really forcing it with my leg muscles, or am I feeling like my hamstrings and the backs of the thighs jam up? I want to feel it more through the muscles in and around. Just think of the inner tube around these pelvic bones, right? And now you can do your left hip. And you may find it's easier to coordinate and experience muscles moving one way or the other. So for me, I have to really think to wake up to lift the right hip up. The left hip is like ready to go. We just notice these things. But you can lift the left hip to think of lifting the left hip to create this movement, or you can push into the right hip to create the movement. Any combination of the two. What is most easeful? And this one too can be done side to side. So you can go right hip and relax down, and left hip, just as if you're walking. Take a few more. And an unusual turn of occurrence before we take our relaxation today. I'm going to have you roll to one side and come all the way up to standing. So I had the blessing of being at the beach the last 5 days. And it is the most spectacular training for me, I've realized, to watch people walk through the sand, because I get to see their, posture. So posture is something that's a static thing. How do we stand? But I get to see their gait when they're moving and what we call their carriage. So carriage takes in posture, but it's also how we hold ourselves, and carriage is very much affected by emotional things too. But we look at things like our joint mobility. So we're going to go ahead and stand up, and let's see if I can get my whole self in the, okay, I'm going to have to crack this up a little bit. Take our whole selves into the picture. And even if you just have a little bit of space, I want you to pick the front bony landmarks first and just take some really slow, small steps. And notice, so we're going to do like a swagger. You've got a swagger in your walk. Notice if you can let, as the foot comes forward, can you let the hip follow? Or the other way is, does the hip come forward and does the foot follow? So we're looking at that, what the movement we were just doing on the ground, right? So what I see is a lot of people are stuck in their pelvis, and their walk will look like this. And I don't know if you can see that on camera. There's no movement from the pelvis, and that can travel down into the knees. So the less your pelvis can take that rotation and the lift, the harder it is on your joints and your knees and your ankles, and then those start to stiffen up. So we get this compensatory tightness through the muscles. Just let yourself play with one of those motions. So it might be the rotation of the hips, walking around. Add some sway to your swagger. And then also work on the lift. So you can do the one hip up and exaggerate a little bit. See if you can notice now how the way that in order to get, so we could get the foot up obviously by bending the knee, and you see that, but can you feel your waist shorten on one side and lengthen on the other? So just becoming more aware of the way the pelvis is functioning to move your legs and to hold your spine. That's part of your carriage and your gait. And then the other thing that's a little bit less obvious to notice, and I just have this little area, you can go in circles, right? I'm trying to stay on the camera, is this anterior-posterior tilt. That's coming in too. So as you step forward, there's a little bit more of a, as the foot plants, there's this anterior tilt, and you might feel it as the low back shortens and the pelvis will tilt forward. And then you start to bring that other foot forward, and as you do that, there's a point where your pelvis is in neutral, but then it almost goes into what we call the dog tail. For a brief moment, the low back gets long, and we go into posterior tilt. So you can kind of, that one feels sort of funny when you walk around doing that. But see if you can, in motion, stay walking, get that anterior posterior tilt moving. Just have a little fun with it. So that's the key, is we don't want to be stuck on our hips. And now you can let your arms fall, or you can even feel your backside, but let your arms fall and let them swing too. So we know that when we walk, whichever foot comes forward, the opposite shoulder comes forward. So that's another thing I watch, is that a lot of times when we're stuck in the pelvis, if you tend to have tension in the neck and shoulders, if the pelvis isn't moving, neither are the shoulders. The shoulders stay right here at our sides, versus having that ability to let the arms swing, right? Opposite arm and hip, or opposite shoulder and hip come forward. That's it. Nice. I hope you had fun walking around your room. Go ahead and sit down. But that's a really functional thing to do. If you feel yourself, I know I do a lot of walking, and beach walking is the test for all of this, because our muscle coordination is so different with our foot on the sand and all the rest. So if you find yourself locked up in your pelvis when you're walking, take a couple deliberate steps, letting the pelvis lead. So instead of the foot coming forward and then waiting to see if the pelvis follows it, take the pelvis forward. And we're not going to walk like that all the time, I understand, but just find that freedom. Or lift a hip on purpose. Lift your waist. Find that anterior posterior tilt. Come on down, and we're going to rest for a moment. So please take yourself into a comfortable position. Onto your back, relax, let go. And if you'd like to, we can do something called Trimurti Mudra, where you're going to take your thumbs together, tips of the thumbs, and the tips of the index fingers, and just place your hands gently on your lower belly. Just right, so my thumbs are right about at my navel center, and my hands, so basically the position of my hands is mimicking the position of my sacrum on the back side. And take some nice, soft belly breaths. Just allowing the abdomen to completely relax. Nice, easeful inhale and exhale. As your abdomen expands, the diaphragm contracts. So the abdomen stretches. We feel the tension on the abdomen because of the diaphragm pulling down. And then we take that exhalation. The abdomen relaxes, the abdomen draws in and the diaphragm relaxes. So something I recognize in these ideas that we get stuck in the pelvis, and that's why we need to reset it, is this muscular stuckness, is that there's a lot going on in the subtle body in the pelvis. The pelvis is the home to two of our energy centers, two chakras. So if you go back down, just image and experience the base of your spine, those sits bones, pelvic floor region. That is what we call the Muladhara or root chakra. You can also feel it through your legs. And it's the earth energy in our bodies. And we connect to it through our feet, through walking on the earth, certainly in sand. If that's helpful, you can imagine yourself walking on a beautiful sandy beach, emerald green water and blue sky, tugboats being pulling some ships by. There were dolphins playing, beautiful. But wherever it is that you walk and you can feel your earth and connect to the earth element. Maybe that's water for you, maybe it's in the mountains, might be in a park near your house. Connecting with your own earth energy. And the Muladhara also is connected to your sense of smell. So if you have a favorite scent, many of our flowers here in Wisconsin are blooming. See if you can think of a favorite scent. Can you create that sensual feeling of the scent just by thinking of it? And send it down to the base of your spine, the bottom of the pelvic bowl, those sits bones, into your leg bones. And then the second of the energy centers is the Svadhisthana. And the Svadhisthana means one's own place. It is connected to the element of water. Thus, my beach imagery. The water is always moving, always flowing. And so much of your body is made up of water. But we also say that this is our pleasure center. It's our space of passion. What is it that you're passionate about? And passion can be an attachment to things, the things that we want. And it can also be an aversion from things. We can be passionate about not wanting to experience things. And it's all part of that flow through this energetic center. And the Svadhisthana chakra is related to our sense of taste. So you can even think of putting something tasty in your mouth. So you take nice, soft breaths into the belly. Each time you breathe in, feel the rise, the expansion, even that gentle tension of the skin stretching and all the connective tissues. And each breath out is an opportunity to just land and relax. Feel the weight of your bones being supported by the earth. bones in the pelvis, arms, legs, your head, everything, but starting from the pelvis. And invite yourself back into your room without opening your eyes. Just think of where you are in your room. You can think of the walls and the ceiling and the floor. Maybe you have pets there with you today. And then if you'd like to take your full body yawn and start again today with this new swagger in your walk, you can take a big inhalation, stretch your arms up, reach your legs out, anything else that feels good. If you'd rather curl into a fetal ball, hug your knees into your chest and give your low back a little massage. That is always lovely too, giving that sacred sacrum a little massage. And then I will take my hands to my heart as you take your time coming up and say thank you for joining me for this pelvic reset today. I will be here for questions, and as a continuation of this, on Monday, the link has not been put up, but we will be doing a practice to awaken some of these muscles around the pelvis. So we're going to work on finding the muscles. Are they chronically tight? Are they completely loose and inactive? So that'll be Monday's practice. And then Wednesday, we're going to do something a little bit different. It will be a longer practice like this, and we are going to do a somatic yin practice. So we'll do some movement through the pelvis, and then we're going to stop and hold postures in a yin-like fashion, which means we hold them a little bit longer, allow the muscles to relax. So that's next week's schedule. In the meantime, have a great weekend. And thank you for all your support. You can support me through Patreon. You can support me on Venmo. My students, thank you so much. Peace, joy, love, and light.